preparing preparing the workforce for AI-driven transformations. I'm Michael Lafferty, and I'm head of data and technology apprenticeships at Kaplan. And I'm joined today by my co-host Chiraag Swaly, who is the head of apprenticeship design, and he's also the Gen AI education lead at Kaplan as well. And we want to discuss a topic that we both think is critical for businesses today. So in essence, this session is about how organizations can ensure their employees have the skills to thrive as AI becomes more integrated in the workplace. We'll explore why upskilling and reskilling are a necessity. So why do we think this is important? We'd say because AI isn't just changing the way that we work, it's also reshaping what skills are in demand and what jobs look like as well. And we think that companies that invest in their people will be the ones that successfully adapt, innovate, and lead going forward. So we'll be sharing some of our own experience of AI transformation at Kaplan, as this is something that we're doing ourselves currently. So whether you're a leader, a learning professional, HR professional, or simply interested in understanding the future of work, we hope this webinar is going to provide you with some valuable insights, but also some practical strategies as well. We're going to discuss 5 key topics. We're going to run a couple of polls as well, so please interact with us. And then we'll take questions at the end of our discussion as well. And I should mention, I'm joined today as well by our colleague, Joel, who's going to be monitoring the chat and reading out any questions or comments later on as well. So first area we want to start is probably with defining what exactly we mean by upskilling and reskilling, and also why both matter. So Chiraag, we hear the terms upskilling and reskilling used a lot, especially with AI transforming the workplace. But I think it's important that we're clear on our definitions. So could you break down in simple terms what upskilling and reskilling mean, and perhaps give us an example for each?
Sure, yeah. So if we think about upskilling, so you've already got a specific skill set and you're in a specific job. Upskilling is to enhance that. So you're augmenting, you're adding on to that. So you're, in essence, deepening or enhancing that skill, still staying within your current job role. So as an example would be maybe a finance analyst will learn how to prompt engineer because they can use that within a financial modeling system. Or a data analyst will start using a little bit of AI when they're doing their data analysis tools. So they're still doing the core function of their job, but they're upskilling in the sense they're adding a little bit more to that, they're enhancing that. On the other hand, a reskill would require a job role change. So you're effectively moving. It could be an adjacent job role and you're moving into a different way of doing things, which may be related, but in effect, you're doing something different. And examples of this could be, again, you may have a customer support person who then moves into a data role, because then they're not just doing customer support, they're actually then working with data and AI, for example. Or you may have a manufacturing worker who then was doing a manual job, but then move on to robotics, becomes a robotic technician, and they're doing more automated stuff. So, there could be a move from something manual to technical, a job role function changes, but effectively they have to learn significantly new skills and a new way of doing things. And that's a reskilling. Yeah.
Okay, so we know what upskilling and reskilling actually mean, but why is this such a critical focus right now? What's driving the urgency behind businesses needing to prioritize these areas?
Yeah, I think it's the main thing with this one is how core skills are changing. So if you look at the World Economic Forum, they're predicting that employees expect around 39% of core skills to shift by 2030. Considering in the next 5 years, that's a significant shift, right? And even though it's been down from maybe 2023, where they said 44%, still significant. And that means that if the core skills are shifting, that means you do have a requirement for people to learn more, whether it's upskilling or reskilling. Even when you look at stats like, for example, LinkedIn talks about, since 2023, late 2023 alone, just 177% increase in AI literacy skills. So AI literacy, for example, is a big thing. And so that's a key part. But if you look at it from 2 lenses, you've got the whole idea of having a retention lever, right? So upskilling will create ways to make sure that you're cutting hiring costs because you can reuse existing people and enhance what they're doing. But it's also the risk lens, right? If you have roles that are at risk, you can then reskill people so they can take on other roles which are more relevant in this change. So key thing is, I guess the summary is, there's constant change happening, which means job roles are changing, and the need is important to either upskill or reskill depending on your situation and what the organization needs.
Yeah, so you've outlined some significant challenges for businesses there in terms of their people, for sure, and how this can help. So very interesting so far. And one of the things that we'd like to do is hear a little bit from our audience as well, I think. So I'm just going to ask Joel if you'd be able to run our first poll question, because one of the things that we're quite interested in is kind of, we know where our organization is in terms of AI transformation and AI skills development, but we'd be interested to know where your organizations are as well. Thanks, everyone. See those responses coming in. Okay, great. Thanks for participating there, everybody. So the highest percentage in terms of responses in our poll question there is, the question is, where is your organization today on AI skills development? And no concrete plans is the biggest response at 59%. I guess that probably doesn't come as a surprise to us. However, one of the things I would say is that where we are, I would say that we definitely have concrete plans in place. So kind of that's kind of to our benefit, but we think all organizations perhaps need to as well. Next one was we run ad hoc AI training, but nothing formal, with 18%. So thank you very much for participating in that poll, everybody.
Yeah, and I wonder, Joel, I guess if we just click share results just for a moment, so you can see this. So you should be able to see these on your screen, so you can get a sense of what this is. I mean, with about 71 responses, that's you can sort of get a sense of where people are. And again, it shows, right? It's a very journey, but you can see a significant percentage maybe don't have concrete plans yet, but you start by starting to think about it and do something with that. So I think really interesting as well, that I guess majority is between no concrete plans and then running ad hoc AI training, but nothing formal, with probably about a quarter or less than a quarter of people maybe having a little bit more of a mature or actively designing a program.
So the next area we wanted to explore was best practices for AI-driven training programs. Chiraag, when organizations think about implementing AI-driven training, they often jump straight into thinking about the training content itself, but I suspect there's actually a lot more to it than just that. What are some of the key best practices you'd recommend for businesses looking to set up an effective AI training program beyond just creating content?
Yeah, I think that's a useful question, Michael, because I think the first thing is we should just stop thinking mainly through having a course catalog. Because it's so easy to just simply say, oh, we have a course catalog and we want people to go through these particular courses. And I think maybe you start first with a skills graph. And the skills graph is simply looking at where are we currently, what are the job roles, what are job functions, and what are the gaps in skills, and then trying to bridge those skills using learning, rather than simply saying we have these amount of courses and everyone should go and sort of do these courses. And I guess the next stage for that, when I think about learning, I think learning, when you're designing courses or you're delivering content, it's look at it from a product development perspective or taking a product development angle. And that would be, actually, let's run something. Let's run a sprint. Let's deliver some kind of course. See where we land with that. Release that out, gather information, and iterate. And this could be very important. So at Kaplan, we've got our own big AI literacy drive, and we've tried different things. There's certain things we've tried where we then said, oh, okay, let's try a format of something. So for example, once we tried something what we call promptathons, where then, okay, let's help people come in and solve a business problem using AI. How does that land? What are people getting? And then off the back of it, we then say, okay, what do we need to do for different business functions? So I think there's that aspect, and then there's the whole aspect of let's obviously blend the humans and AI. Having an adaptive platforms where you have live cohorts, but at the same time, if people are learning about AI, you can leverage AI as well. So you can have that because AI can be really powerful to provide some feedback, instant feedback, provide structured, contextualized learning. So you can sort of do that. So I think those are really interesting ways of approaching that. But also, I think linking learning to maybe KPIs. So rather than saying how many courses have you completed, right, linking it to actually, is it improving performance? So simply then saying, oh, we've attended course X, course Y, course, and then that's ticked off for the employee. I don't think that's always as helpful. But actually, if you link it to, as a result of people learning these skills, what have we been able to do? And linking to KPIs, I think, could be quite helpful. And then having that visibility, so if you incentivize people for learning, whether to get badges or certifications or whatever, or doing the learning, that can motivate people. So I would say these are some of the strategies people can adopt.
Yeah,
Mm,
thank you. There's some really insightful points there, actually. I particularly like the idea of treating learning like product development. That
mm.
iterative approach makes so much sense today. And I think many organizations might overlook the importance of visibly incentivizing learning as well. So it's not just about offering the training, it's about making it clear that it's valued and rewarded. And I think it's fair to say that's been our experience so far.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and one thing that strikes me is how important it is to tailor these training approaches to specific departments, because each area of the business will be using Gen AI in different ways or have different aspirations for how they want to use it as well. So really, it's about liaising with each department. I think that is crucial, and I think we've been doing a lot of that, and understanding their current use cases and where they see the potential for AI integration. And then that way, the training program becomes much more relevant and impactful, I'd say.
Yeah, because one size doesn't fit all, right? And you're appreciating that maybe there's common things, principles that people need to understand. For example, if we talk about AI, there may be certain principles people need to understand, but then there may be other things like, how do I apply this to my own workflow? There are different people who maybe use different kinds of data applications, different ways of doing things, and maybe supporting them in understanding that for their needs can also be helpful.
Yeah, and I'd say the enviable position we're in at the moment with our program is that I almost sense amongst our colleagues and staff that there's a bit of FOMO going on, fear of
Mm.
missing out. I mean, everybody knows that we've got this substantial AI transformation program, and people want to be involved in it, and they understand now how valuable it is because of the feedback and the conversations that are going on. People want to do this, and if they don't get on it and do it, they kind of feel like they're definitely missing out now, which is quite exciting for us, I think.
Yeah, and I think psychologically that's a nice place to be in. You could have the other end of the spectrum where people have completely disengaged and they're worried about stuff. But whilst if you have people like, oh, I want this, I really want this, and then you have people showing up. Like we, for example, internally, we've done sessions where we're like, oh, we'll do an hour for people just where they're learning some stuff, and then you have 250 people show up for a session, a webinar, and that's incredible because you then see that people have the drive to learn. And I think, but it's important to create that environment for people to then say, okay, I'm really keen to learn, and they can see that the organization is supporting them.
Mhm. Yeah, and just if I think about my own experience, just this week I've received 7 invites to workshops, all focused on Gemini. So ranging from prompting through to gems. So there's certainly some stuff in there that I'd like to get more exposure to and learn a bit about. But it really shows that there's something going on. It's quite significant, and
Mm,
it's landing well with
mm.
our people as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm sure it's not always plain sailing. So another area we wanted to talk about was overcoming challenges in workforce transformation. And just before we start to talk about that topic, we'd actually like to put a second poll on the screen, please, Joel. And that poll is going to ask what your biggest single obstacle is to scaling AI-driven learning. Really interesting responses coming in here.
Yeah, it's comment coming through. Sometimes there's a mix. It's not just that one reason.
Yeah, very good point.
We'll probably give it another few seconds, I think, for some more people to add on.
That's great. 67 responses. Yeah, if we could share those results, please.
There we go. Yeah, those are shared now on screen for people.
Yeah, so the highest proportion of responses for this question is we're not sure which skills to prioritize. That's perfectly valid response. Actually, if you think about it, especially if you're considering this in the context of across an organization and the multiple different roles and priorities of varying departments. It's quite interesting. Somebody said there's never a single reason. That's a really valid point to make as well. In terms of we're not sure which skills to prioritize, what we'd probably recommend is that you do actually get out there and talk to the departments, and you do find out what their use cases are and what their aspirations for AI is, rather than, as we've mentioned already, just throwing some courses out there and saying, here they are. You actually need to find out what it is people want to be able to get and want to be able to do with the new tools that they've got. Remember, we said at the start, I suppose, that this is transforming the way that people work, but also the jobs that they're doing. So I think you have to talk to people in those departments and find out what they need.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, there's a couple of comments as well where people are like, we're not even sure where to start. And I think it's okay to be in that position because, you know, that's how people sort of sometimes start. But at least, you know, hopefully, you know, in the next section, we'll talk about maybe you can get some ideas on how you can start that journey a little bit. And once you start getting a few people on board, you get a little bit of momentum. And I think that starts changing what's possible and as well. But yeah, some really interesting results coming from that poll.
Yeah, so thanks so much for your responses to that poll about the biggest challenges to implementing AI upskilling, reskilling. It's really interesting to see what was on people's minds. So we've talked about best practices for setting up AI-driven training programs, but I'm sure it's not always smooth sailing. Chiraag, what do you think are some of the challenges organizations face when trying to implement these workforce transformations? And is there anything they can do to mitigate them?
Yeah, there's well, I think there's a few different challenges, I would say. I mean, earlier you mentioned FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. I think sometimes there's the other one. You know, maybe there's a whole fear of job loss, right? And sometimes people are like, oh, this whole AI thing has come. Am I going to be replaced because something's going to be able to do what I do in effect? So there's a little bit of that. And I think usually what goes wrong with that, if there's silence, there's not a lot. If the organizations don't say much about things, people make assumptions and there's rumors that go around. They're like, oh, you know, well, there's all this tech coming in. What does that mean for my job role, right? And I think to mitigate that, it's important for organizations to really communicate, to show augmented either job examples or show how they're supporting the people, so people don't feel like they're worried about their job and they feel excited about the whole idea of, oh, I want to learn this so I can transition into my new way of doing things. So that's certainly one area that's a little bit of a problem. But then there's the whole idea of training fatigue, right? Organizations, no matter which sector, you always have people who there's the need for training and there's always changes abound. And then you're like, okay, here's another course, here's another course. And I think that could bring about training fatigue. And I think a good tactic would be maybe introduce the idea of micro learning, so or embedded within the daily workflow. So it's a different way, so people can get the whole culture and mindset of let me learn a little bit every day, but it's not, I don't have to worry about, oh, I need to do another course. So I think changing that mindset and enabling that micro learning could be quite useful and quite powerful.
Yeah, and
Then
and
there's
a little bit every now and then cumulatively actually becomes quite a lot, doesn't it? And then it becomes
absolutely.
transformational.
Yeah, and I personally think consistency will out trump anything else, right? Consistency will out trump single level of intensity, right? You want, if someone did 10 minutes a day, they almost done an hour in a week, rather than trying to get a couple hours in every couple of weeks, which maybe may not always work. Obviously, if you've got dedicated time and you've got deep focus time, sure. But sometimes it's just easier to commit to shorter bursts. And then if you're consistently going to do that in upskill, that helps as well. Then there's the whole digital divide in the sense you have people, maybe frontline workers, they're really busy all the time. And they miss out on some of the training, and then finding ways to make sure you include all staff members, not just then saying, oh, okay, we'll only do it for selected member of staff. Let's try and get that for more people. So that's the other thing that I think is really important from a leadership perspective. And
Agree.
then there's the whole aspect around return on investment, right? A lot of times L&D is seen as a cost center, like, oh, we're just spending more on training and all of that. But I think then linking this to the metrics, whether it's attrition, people leaving, or with AI, big thing, productivity. How can we, the amount of time, if they spend 2 to 3 hours of training, fine, they were not doing work during that period, but how quickly can they recover that back if they know how to use AI effectively? So that's the other bit that I think should be mapped out, or even things like NPS that you can look at, or different metrics that you can look at. I guess the last bit is the whole idea of this change fatigue, right? Constant changes, but change is inevitable, and especially in the current landscape, you're constantly going to have a lot of change. So part of it is almost then saying, okay, let's celebrating the quick wins and making sure people understand that, yeah, the change is happening, but there's things coming out as a result of it, and that keeps them engaged in that process. But I think this storytelling is important from a leadership perspective. The storytelling, okay, we've done this, or this is what has resulted, and I think that really helps. So I'd say these are some of the things that are currently challenges that people are navigating, and adding on. But if there's anything else that people have think have missed, feel free to add those on to comments as well.
So yeah, thank you. So those are all valuable strategies for tackling the challenges of workforce transformation. But it seems like there's still a big gap to bridge, and maybe our whole response is saying that as well to us today. I noticed this stat: only 12% of workers received AI specific training in 2024. That seems quite low. What do you think that tells us about the current state of AI upskilling and challenges for businesses?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. In 2024, Gen AI was still new. I guess it's sort of 2023 where a lot of Gen AI sort of took off. But yeah, you're right. 12% is low. 12% is low. So I guess what it tells me is, well, again, going back to the polls, like people like, where do we start? Or maybe people are trying to figure out their own learning. People are just self-learning. They're going and trying to learn stuff. And maybe organizations are still trying to figure out what is it that we need to do. But I think for me, then says there's opportunities. There's opportunity for people then say, okay, let's increase that number. Let's get more people in 2025 learning about AI in whatever way that supports them and the organization in their roles. So I think from there, yes, definitely a low number, but it can only then be improved, right? Because it's such a low number that then say, well, actually, let's support organizations and individuals to be able to do that.
Thank you. So the next area I'd like to explore is how AI itself can accelerate skill development. So we've been talking a lot about how businesses can use training programs to upskill and reskill their workforce for AI. But it seems like AI itself can also play a role in how we learn. So how do you think AI is actually accelerating skill development beyond just being a topic to learn about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I look at it. What's the difference between maybe just having access to internet where you can Google something to using AI? AI has a lot more power. So if you're using AI as a collaborative partner to learn, there's quite a few different things. So first of all, you can have the whole idea of adaptive learning paths, right? So you can have AI support a learner in terms of where they are at, start with where they are at, and then give them something that's contextualized for them. So if you use generative AI as a coach, for example, right, you can have conversations, interactive conversations, which provide instant feedback and allow just enough for an employee to be able to challenge and build their skills, but in a very quick fashion. You could see, because very quickly, if you searched for something, or if you didn't have any other partner, if you didn't have maybe a peer, or you didn't have a tutor to teach you something, it becomes a lot more harder. You have to self-validate. If you used AI to learn a skill and then check and validate, do I have my understanding right? That becomes a big difference. So you're almost using that AI to then give you that feedback, collaborative partner, and using that as a thinking tool, but still being in control. You're still driving that learning. And again, these could be enhanced using simulations. So a lot of simulations, obviously, whether, for example, with AR and VR, you can use simulations where you can create specific things, that skill set that people need, and AI could be used to further enhance that. Things that would have only been possible maybe in a class environment, or creating a role, or putting people in an actual setting, which is not always possible or quite expensive. You can start using AI to do that. And I think there's some great use cases for things like that, which I think is
Yeah,
really
there's some
interesting.
really exciting use cases I've seen for that. Yeah, advisors being able to rehearse customer conversations, really powerful stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and all, if you look at even the LLMs at the moment, if you wanted to have a conversation, you could put in a scenario, and you can then say, like, can I just have a conversation, whether it's with ChatGPT or Gemini, or whichever engine you're using. You could just go in and have that, and that interactivity, because a lot of times people maybe are used to the idea of using generative AI as, oh, I'll give you a prompt and you can give me what I need. But if you flip it on its head, you then say, well, I'm using AI collaboratively to be able to learn or create those scenarios. Very different way of approaching that.
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying that. I think you're advocating using it as a partner, collaborating to get
Absolutely.
the maximum benefit from it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, and I think from that perspective, from a skill development perspective, you can have, I mean, we know there's lots of existing technologies that have already got AI embedded in them, whether you're using Microsoft, or Microsoft Teams will have that, or you're using, so, like if the say Salesforce, for example, will already have AI enabled in there. There's lots of different things that already have stuff in there. But what you can do is you can leverage those a little bit more when you're doing some of your learning, because you can then say, oh, actually, I'm using the software. Can I enhance AI so it knows the context of what I'm doing? It makes it a lot more quicker to be able to quickly learn a skill, but also very specifically honing in on what you need, rather than generically. And it goes back to the whole idea of not having a general course for everyone, but then saying, oh, how can you be enabled to do what you need to do in that particular moment? So those are sort of things I would say at the moment, which can really help accelerate the skill development with AI.
Yeah. I guess personally, I find it fascinating to see how AI is not just changing what we learn, but also how we learn. And we have seen clear examples of that in our own experience. So those examples really highlight the potential for personalized, efficient, and engaging skill development, I'd say. And I think the idea of AI acting as a personal coach is particularly exciting. It could really broaden access to expert feedback and guidance. So thank you for that.
Yeah, exciting. I think it's really exciting.
Indeed, yeah. And the last area we wanted to explore was pretty important, leadership's role in a culture of continuous learning. So, Chiraag, we've covered a lot today so far, from defining upskilling and reskilling to how AI itself can accelerate learning. But I think at the end of the day, these initiatives really hinge on leadership buy-in and action. What do you see as the key roles that leadership plays in fostering a culture of effective learning in the context of AI adoption?
Yeah, the leadership is very important. And I think one of the things that is really important when we talk about leaders, maybe starting off with owning the narrative, right? The AI adoption is actually a business story, right? It's not just a HR narrative, not HR, we're doing this, but really, the leaders sort of telling the story of why this is important, how we are doing this, and how it's coming out for us, basically. So I think leaders need to own the narrative. That's very important. And when it comes from leaders themselves, it really helps. And talking about leaders themselves, if themselves, so senior executives, they should have their own learning plans. So, people in senior leadership positions should also be involved actively in the learning rather than simply then directing and saying everyone needs to do this. And I think, again, that really helps a big difference because they appreciate why this is important and they're also an active part of this. But I also think when you're funding, a lot of times you see organizations, maybe they have small pilots. We talk about almost to think of it as pilotitis, right? It's like you just have all this small pockets of things happening. But and I think it's okay. I mean, people manage to do that, but it doesn't really, there isn't a lot happening in the wide organization. I think funding at scale would be really important from a leadership perspective.
That's a really interesting point,
Yeah.
because I'd say that that here at Kaplan we love a pilot in the past, but I would say definitely in terms of our Gen AI education program, we definitely did not pilot. We went all in. It was a case of, if you're going to get wet, you might as well jump in the pool. I think that was our approach.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, right? Because then if you have pilots, it's small and fine. I appreciate that there's a lot of advantage of doing something like a pilot to be able to move in, but you don't want that to then to hamper the delay and also only allow it for people at certain. And then again, you then have the whole idea of people like, oh, only selected people are doing this. What does that mean for me in my job, right? If you have an initiative for everyone, people feel more included in that.
And I think we can be certain of one thing: this isn't going away. It's not going anywhere else. It's here to stay. So why pilot? You're going to have to adopt these skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other things you can do is you can link this, you can hardwire this to like your performance systems and say no, include some of the stuff so people encouraged to use some more of the learning. So whether it's linking to things like promotion criteria or being able to demonstrating new skill application and adoption, so you can link it to things like we mentioned previously, connecting to things like KPIs. But I think the overall most important thing is the signaling safety. I think is really important because the key thing with AI right now, there's a lot of unknowns, right? There's not one person, not one organization. They're like, oh, we've got everything figured out. Even though they may say with their AI maturity, no one's going to say we know everything, we've got this figured out. Which means they'll try things out, and sometimes things will not work. So I think from a leadership perspective, the whole idea is we need to celebrate those experiments and then say, okay, oh, something didn't work, no problems. We iterate and we continue working on that. But people should be, encouraged and empowered to be able to say, okay, oh, it's fine. I can do this, and I know my organization will support me when it comes to doing that. So I think that really helps because everyone is then saying, oh, no issues at all. I'm not worried that much because my organization is backing me. And also it just means it increases the amount of adoption rate, how many people are engaged, how quickly things move on, because you're learning a lot from your mistakes, but you're not worried about, oh, we're making these mistakes. What does that mean for us? So I think that's a really important point as well.
Yeah, thank you. And if I think about our own experience, it seems strange to say it, but it seems like quite a while ago that we first started rolling out some of our successful AI tools here at Kaplan. And I think some of the early ones I remember were tools that were helping our talent coaches working with their apprentices. Real game changers for the coaches to help them do things like manage their workloads more reasonably, and also to be more accurate with some of the work they were doing with apprentices. But then along came Gemini, rolled out and integrating for all members of staff, and I just think that was a game changer that absolutely accelerated our AI-driven transformation enormously. So it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it continues to do so, isn't it? It's like you then say, well, actually, there's a couple of things that, well, you've adopted that, but AI keeps changing every single day. Something new is coming out, or there's new ways of doing things, or you uncover a new use case, or you realize how to fine tune, and you realize what to do as well. And I'm pretty sure when we come to the Q&A, people will be sort of exploring some of that stuff. But again, you then realize, okay, fine, we've jumped onto this, but you continuously work on that, which then becomes an enabler for people. But yeah, I think it's been super exciting in terms of the journey, and then but you realize there's lots of work to be doing, but at least then you're in a position to continue to do that if you've laid the foundation.
Indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of our planned discussion for today. We've covered a lot of ground, from defining upskilling and reskilling to exploring how leadership can foster that culture of continuous learning in the age of AI. We hope this has been insightful for you all. And now we've got a few minutes for Q&A. And Joe will be reading out some questions from the chat. So please, if you have any questions or thoughts, because we'd be really excited to hear your comments as well, pop them in the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them.
Yeah, we've got one here from Stuart who wants to know, will there be some more accountancy practice specific examples of how to upskill and adopt AI in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk a little bit around that. So, I mean, irrespective of where, so if you think from an accountancy practice, there's multiple different things. So you could simply have if you look at an accountancy workflow, what are different things? You could have someone maybe who is working and doing basic accounting. They're doing maybe bookkeeping, and part of it maybe is like, how do I use AI to become more efficient, right? So the efficiency may be, well, how do I quickly work together with maybe some data, or how do I read through lots of documents because I have to read and understanding some documents in there, or simply, keeping up to date with changes, right? From an accounting perspective, if you need to keep track of what's happening, legislation changes, new rules coming in, there could be things like that. So there are multiple use cases that people have, but I just want to try and get a sense of, were you hoping, Stuart, were you hoping for us to list out potentially what people may be doing in accountancy, or were there specific things you wanted to ask about? Feel free to ask in the chat as well. But I don't know, Michael, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, the other thing I'd probably add is that within accountancy, I would say it's not just within accountancy. I think there are lots of examples that we've seen where upskilling and adopting AI helps people in their work roles. A great example that we share quite a lot with people, and you could be working in accountancy practice or you could be working anywhere else, is that when you come back from holiday and you open up your email and wonder what lies in your inbox for you, we now use Gemini to ask questions such as, is there anything I need to prioritize today that I've missed over the last week? And it will give us that response. So I'd add that as well, Stuart.
Yeah, there's a whole productivity angle. So if you look productivity, which will apply no matter what job role you're doing, which could be things like email management, it could be calendar management, it could simply be things like look at the AI and say, what does this week look like? Where have I got gaps which I can use? What does my month look like? But also you could then say, well, I'm trying to set some meetings up with someone. Can you help me arrange some time? So there's the admin function that AI can help, but there's also other things like, for example, we've had a meeting, and then you can look at that meeting and say, what are the action points? We had this discussion. What are the action points? What do I need to do from this? Because it can look at that data, and rather than you having to work through your notes to be able to sort of look through that. And from a productivity perspective, a lot of that can be used. But again, looking at a variety of different documents, learning quickly to make sure if you had a chain of emails, you're like, well, what are they saying? So you'd have things like that. But yeah, okay. So students come back and said, I'm looking for more automation examples as opposed to admin examples. Yeah. So, I mean, automation could be, for example, you may be doing common things that you're working across with data, for example, data sets, or you're looking at from a spreadsheet perspective. You could have things linked in which then say, okay, can you pull data from maybe another source? Because AI can do that and say, okay, let's pull that again in here and automatically update something that maybe you are manually doing. Maybe if you're working with certain data sets, you can start doing some stuff as well in there. There's a lot, depending on the systems you're using, there's different things. AI now, they have the whole idea of AI agents, which can go and do stuff so they can quickly pull together stuff for you. So it really depends on what's at your disposal for what goes on. But from an automation perspective, at the moment, there's a big thing with AI. So there's obviously generative AI in terms of the LLMs, but there's the agents that come in, and different providers now have more and more agents, which allow you to do different functionality, and they automatically do those for you.
Claire has asked something quite interesting. Does that work via a plugin? How does the AI work alongside your email? I'd say it's fully integrated, Claire. So we love the G Suite at Kaplan. So we use Google tools, and that means we use Sheets, Google Documents, Gmail, and Gemini is integrated throughout. It's across all of those applications. So if we open up a window with email, or we open up a window with a document in or with a sheet in, Gemini is there inside integrated already. So, for example, if I gave another example other than email, if I think about a sheet, a Google Sheet, which is essentially the equivalent of a spreadsheet, I might look at data, and previously I might have had to have put a formula in to try and do some analysis, even if it was just simple analysis, such as, let's say, a gender breakdown. So how many male versus female are in this data. Now I can just ask Gemini to do it. So I can have the sheet open, have Gemini there in the sidebar on the right-hand side, and I can just say to Gemini, can you give me the proportion of male to female in this data set? And it will tell me within seconds. It's amazing, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Claire, so we use Google Suite, but like, for example, if you're using Microsoft have within the application, they have something called Copilot, and Copilot can do the same thing again within your email systems as well. So it depends on the platforms that you're using. But just to the second question, so Wendy asked, how does G Suite from a data protection angle? Because these are enterprise level tools. So enterprise level tools, that means that they are within your organization. That means the data is not going out. So it's very different to opening up ChatGPT, for example, and adding some stuff in there. This is integrated within that. So depending on what your organization has, and if it has that, then you're covered within that data protection perspective, because it's within that enterprise tool and the data is not going out.
And I think it shows the level of investment as well from leadership here to roll that out, to integrate that. It comes at a significant cost as well, but it's seen as essential to not just keep pace, but to be ahead. So yeah, some interesting points raised there. Thank you. And do remember, if we've got a few minutes left, if anybody would like to make any comments, maybe about their own journeys in this area of AI transformation, and you want to share that with the audience, please do so. Okay, as we come towards the close, the other thing I would like to say is that one of the things that we will do is we'll be sharing a handout as well, which will cover the same 5 areas that we've spoken about today. So if there's anything that you've kind of missed and want to recap on, we'll certainly share that with everybody who's registered for the webinar today. So I hope you'll find that helpful. I hope you found the conversation and the insights quite helpful. And I hope, above all, I think that we've perhaps provided you with some practical strategies that you can take back and potentially implement as well in your own organizations. Any final words from you, Chiraag, before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I think, well, thank you everyone for coming and being here. As you can see, there's no one magic way of thinking about AI upskilling and reskilling, but you can see there are multiple dimensions, and depending on where you are in your own journey in your organization as well, there's different approaches. But yeah, hopefully this has given you some food for thought for that, and wish you all the best in your learning journeys.
Thanks, everybody.